Okay, good afternoon and welcome to the first session of the Spring 2018 Sunoikisis Digital Classics module. This module is covering primarily language technologies of one kind or another, and so we're going to see things such as text markup, such as grammatical markup, such as annotation of text of various kinds, and tree banking and extraction of named entity information from texts and so forth in various ways. So in this is the first session. This is going to be a session on translation alignment, and it's led primarily by Maryam, Foradi and Tariq Yousef from Leipzig and Saman Rezaie from Tehran. I'll give you a very brief demo of something towards the end, but we will start off. I will hand over to Maryam, who will introduce what this session is about. Over to you, Maryam.
Hi everyone, thank you very much for having us in this session. So this session is about translation alignment. But before we start with the concept of translation alignment and go to the technical part and then talk about the application of translation alignment in research and pedagogy, I want to start, my colleague Saman from Tehran will start talking about translation itself. We will begin with some history and some theories, and then we continue with Tariq, who will talk about the machine translation at first, and the concept of parallel corpora, and then word alignment. And then we continue with some application of that, the Ugarit, the platform that Tariq has developed, and continue with Perseids as two examples, and then we move on and we speak about what translators do comparing two texts, and then we will go and use dynamic lexicon to see how we can use word alignment to do the same research in another way that the translators do manually. So if you agree, then I start with Saman's talk. Saman is joining us from Tehran, and the problem is that sometimes the internet connection is not stable. So he has kind of recorded his speech. I just I play it, and then he's here. If we have questions, we can ask him, and he tries to answer us.
Translation means to carry something across, which is taking the meaning from one language and moving it into another one, so as to make it understandable for speakers of the target language. This task has been with humans since the very time they started communicating with other cultures. In the history of translation, there have been debates like fidelity, transparency, literal or free translation, which are still alive among scholars' discussions. In this course, various viewpoints were introduced into translation. In 1920s, philosophical approaches were taken into translation, such as deconstruction and abusive fidelity. Among the scholars following this approach stands Walter Benjamin, who believed that translation serves to express the central reciprocal relationship between languages, not by seeking to be the same as original, but by bringing together the two different languages in a pure and higher language. He supports literalism, which allows the pure language to shine through. Machine translation is the other event drawing attention in 1950s. This aimed to produce automatic translations by computer software. Again, in the 50s, several figures emerged who tried to analyze the product and the process of translation, such as Catford and Levy. In 1958, a Russian-American linguist, Roman Jakobson, defined a framework for translation and put it into three categories: intralingual, interlingual, and intersemiotic, and examined the equivalence in meaning between words of different languages. Following this period in 60s, scholars focused on the question of equivalence, such as Naida, Newmark, and Jakobson himself. Applying analytical concepts from Chomsky's generative transformational grammar, Naida describes two types of equivalence in translation: formal and dynamic equivalence, and believes that the success of the translation depends above all on achieving equivalence effect. It was in 1972 when translation was considered as an independent discipline by the work of Holmes. From 1977 on, scholars such as House started emphasizing on text and discourse. Hans Vermeer introduced Scopus theory, which shifted the attention from equivalence to the purpose of translation that should be taken into account in the act of translating. It allows for the possibility that the same text may be translated in different ways according to the purpose of the target text. Cultural term is a term coined by Snell Hornby to refer to a major development in translation studies. It says that instead of being restricted to a transparent and balanced linguistic transaction, translation is perceived as a more complex and power-driven process of negotiation between two cultures influenced by their historical and social circumstances. There are other models and approaches developed in translation studies, such as polysystems theory, descriptive translation studies, translational action, translation in gender, cognitive models, post-colonial translation studies, and corpus-based translation. But because of the time limit, we should content ourselves with only mentioning their names. Well, in translation, let's talk about a little bit as an introduction about the translation of Hafez. In translation of Hafez's poems, certain factors should be kept in mind, such as translation of poetry, culture-specific items, Sufism, and Persian history, among which the translation of poetry and culture-specific items are themselves stand as some schools and strategies in the course of the translation studies. There is always debate over translation of poetry, and many point that poems are not acquiescent toward being translated. In translation of a poem, various issues pop up, such as equivalence, idiomatic meaning, metaphorical expressions, style and rhythm of the poem, and so many others. There are some viewpoints with regard to the translation of poems, and some believe that style should be sacrificed for the true meaning of the poem and its message. However, the problem does not end here in trying to save the meaning of the poem. Other difficulties still exist, which lead translation to the borders of impossibility. Monobaker, a translation scholar, believes that the main concern over the translation of poetry is its translatability. However, by citing some translations of great poems from that of Virgil or Omar Khayyam, she claims that poetry can be translated, and even translations play a large part in literature of most cultures. On the other hand, she points to the opposite view, which is not assured of translation of poetry and emerges from the coincidence of two assumptions, which are: one, translated poetry should be poetry in its own right, and two, poetry is difficult, cryptic, ambiguous, and exhibits a special relationship between form and meaning. These assertions made many writers to claim that such kind of translation demands both special critical abilities and special writing abilities. They also proposed translating into prose in order to deal with this difficulty. Others believe that in order to deal with the difficulty of the translation of poetry, one should move away from the original and produce what is called imitations or versions. However, Hamburger defines such deviation as an admission to defeat, while Jacobson suggests that poetry does not require translation but creative transposition. God states that poetic texts demand direct translation. They must preserve the stylistic qualities of the original. Jackson Matthews describes the proper translation of poetry as: one thing seems clear. To translate a poem whole is to compose another poem. A whole translation will be faithful to the matter, and it will approximate the form of the original, and it will have a life of its own, which is the voice of the translator. It is mostly the case.
Maryam, I'm sorry to interrupt, Maryam, but we're not hearing this at all. This is so garbled. We're hearing about one word in three.
Okay, no problem. So I can continue because it was almost done, this part. So I can continue with the other part. Do you hear us? Okay, so I continue with the other part because I want also to mention the technical aspect. I mean the technical type of translation. So so in contrary to literary translation, the author tries to have more different type of words, and so actually the literary value of a text is in the combination of the words. In technical texts, it's very important to have a consistency in the text, in the sense that if you have used one word in some part of the text, it should be used in the same way in the other parts. And also it is actually the responsibility of the translator, who needs to care and make sure that the translation he or she is producing is consistent in the sense that if I have translated this word in the first line as like X, I should translate the same word in the 10th line exactly as X. And here, and also in technical text, it's very common that the text repeats over and over again. So we are talking about the manuals, for example, and we have different models of Van de Waals. And in these different models, the text is pretty much the same. It just repeats. And here we can talk about computer-aided translation. And I will describe what I mean by computer-aided translation. But I want to clarify that we have different type of the text. So while it is probably very difficult to produce a text by a literal text by machine translation, it's not that difficult to have a technical text with machine translation with a good quality. And here we have the matter of post-editing. As a translator, I don't want to discuss post-editing, but I want to mention that for some type of text, it makes sense to have machine translation, but it makes more sense to use computer-aided translation. And computer-aided translation is consists mostly of translation memories. So these tools, like called CAT tools, are widely used, and these are like any other software, both commercial and free tools. So normally they are free for translators, but the companies should pay for that. So, but the concept behind these CAT tools is the use of translation memories. When we talk about the translation memories, we talk about a sentence data bank in the form of language pairs. So it means that sentences are aligned in the segment level, I would say. And Tariq will continue and talk about different levels of the alignment, translation alignment. But when I avoid to say that the pairs are not on sentence level, but also I say that it's on the segment level, I mean that. So we discuss always the translation units. And normally with translation units, we mean sentences. But in some cases, like thinking about German sentences, the German sentences, the so-called Schachtelsätze, are very complex sentences that are not easily translated into languages like English. So we have, in translation studies, we have a technique, we call it salami technique. So we need to chop the sentence and create several sentences out of one long sentence, for example, in German. And when you are working with translation memories, so you still need to align one German sentence with several, for example, English sentences. So your translation unit in your source text is one sentence, but in your target text is not one sentence anymore. So that's the reason that we talk about translation units or segments. And the approach is that when you are doing the translation, these pairs are automatically saved. So when you confirm your translation, it is used, and then the other translators can use that. So it means that if you have, or even yourself can use that, it means that if you have the same sentence repeated, or also the fuzzy matches, so which means that your sentence is like 70% similar to the saved sentence in translation memory, you will have the translation of that sentence, and it helps you that you keep your translation consistent, although this translation has been made by other translators before. So it really helps that you have a very high quality text. And so if you know about the concordance searches, so the concordance search in the one monolingual text is like that you search for one word and you will have all its instances of this word with a certain span. I mean, several words before and several words after that, after your search word. The bilingual concordance search is that you look for some word and you will have the source text containing that word and then the target text with the translation of that word included in the target text. But still, we have a problem here, and I think that it shows us why word alignment could be beneficial. So, first of all, a bilingual concordance search or a translation memory is not a dynamic lexicon, because a dynamic lexicon refers to specific words and give you the very meaning of that word in the context. So it's very helpful for the translator to figure out that this word, how this word has been translated in a text. And again, so you have a sentence, you know that the translation of your word, the word that you have looked up for, is in the sentence, but you don't know which word exactly is the translation of that word. And here is the difference between sentence alignment and word alignment and the work that we are doing. So I think that here I can give the floor to Tariq so that he can speak about more about the word alignment and the technical aspects.
So first of all, let me define the text alignment. Text alignment is the comparison between two or more text. This text could be in the same language or in two different languages. It's one of the most important tasks in the natural language processing. Could be performed either manually or automatically. We will see that alignment has many levels. So the first one is document alignment. When we have a corpora and we want to align the document with each other, so we use meta information, file size, and maximum entropy based models just to say that this document is parallel to this document, either it's translation or it is different edition of the same document. Then once the documents are aligned, we move to the next level, which is paragraph level alignment. In this case, we use other similarity measures and dynamic programming methods to align them. Once the paragraphs are aligned, we need to align them at sentence level. We use different methods to perform this alignment. The most famous one is the length-based models. So longer sentences in one language tend to be translated into longer sentences in the other language, and the shorter sentences are translated to shorter sentences. Or we can use word correspondence methods, which depend on